Hello and welcome back, everybody, to episode 269 of the DanJohnUniversity.com podcast. I'm Dan John. Each and every week I sit down here and I answer your questions. Listen, this is episode 269, and that just really amazes me. It is hard to be that consistent. I think when I first started doing podcasts, Pat Flynn told me that most podcasts only make it to like 7. And I got to tell you, and the reason it works, it's because of you, the great listeners and the people who read my work and hang out with me at workshops and the questions you ask. If you have questions, please send them to podcast@danjohnuniversity.com. I'll do my best to answer them all. Thank you. Let's begin now. I've got a question from Brian, and this question is something similar to what I've answered before, but let's get going here. I am a firefighter in Florida and also a strength coach personal trainer for my fire department. I was curious about your take on strength and conditioning training for fire cadets in the academy setting. The standard academy training involves classroom and hands-on skills, often involving mock firefighting scenarios in which all the students are fully geared up and participating in the drill. In my day, there was a standard calisthenics type physical training before the training ground sessions began. I believe that as fitness trainers and instructors, we can do more to get these cadets prepared for this career by increasing strength. In teaching simple strength training techniques, I think we can reduce injuries to firefighters in the decades to come. Well, I got to tell you, I think that's true. Now, I've actually done workshops for a number of different firefighting groups. The audiences are hard, to be honest with you. Different, I should say, not hard, different. There's a lot of pushback, just like when I first started working with the military back in, what was it, 98, I guess. And at the time, the groups I worked with were kind of lobbed into two groups, basically triathletes and bodybuilders. And of course, once 9/11 happened, I think we all realized that training like a bodybuilder really doesn't help, with the actual job. And actually training like a triathlete probably has a lot of value, but maybe not in a fist fight or, carrying a whole bunch of stuff up a mountain, which brings us to my point. First, I do agree with you 100% that I think a standard program for every firefighter, we call them first responders now and all kinds of different names, but I think you need to push, pull, hinge, squat, do loaded carries. And I think loaded carries really move up when you get into this field. I have a couple of good friends who are Green Berets, and I did a workshop for them first in Seattle and then out at one of the bases in the far eastern part of the Pacific. Funny phrase to say that if you live in Utah. After each workshop, I would get these pictures because the guys would be sending me pictures of them doing their jobs. And very often what elite special forces do is carry stuff, and that's their job. Famously, there was a story they told me that their job was to carry a whole bunch of helicopter fuel a long ways because they were trying to keep this helicopter thing secret. So they had to refuel, so they had to carry it a long ways. And, carrying as a group, I don't care how many you are, but carrying, I don't know, whatever they are, 5-10 gallon canisters of fuel a long ways is loaded carry work. And I don't know how you prepare for it, except for loaded carries and getting used to hiking with loaded carries a long way. Why do I bring that up? I would circle a couple of things that I think firefighters need to do more of. First, obviously loaded carries, because I said that first. But when I talk to people who do jobs that are, what I consider collision occupations, and whenever I ask the question, what's more important, pull-ups or rope climbing, the answer is always rope climbing. So for me, I'd like to see you guys do more rope climbing, more monkey bars, and more crawling. And the reason I think crawling, obviously, might save your life in a smoke-filled room situation. But I also think crawling is much harder than most of us think. I have a program called the Post-Deployment Program I put up I put together, and it's on the website at danjohnuniversity.com and in a couple of my books. But pardon. The thing about the post-deployment program is that one of the parts of the workout is where you mix loaded carries. In this case, it's generally bear hug carries, bear crawls, and then a standing exercise we call cross crawls. Right hand touches the left knee, left hand touches. It's march in place with, and my athletes at the university call them skippity slappities for whatever reason, and I love it. But I think bear crawls, bear hug carries, farmer walks, sled pulls, rope climbs, monkey bar work really should be a big focus in what we would call the strength and conditioning. Now, obviously, everyone wants to bench press, everyone wants to do curls, and I understand that. I had an interesting conversation with a firefighter on the East Coast who did one of those calendars, firefighter calendars as a fundraiser. And basically, he said, I got in great shape for the photo shoot, but I wasn't worth a damn as a firefighter in those last few weeks. And I thought that was an interesting insight. So clearly, I think over time, I think you'll be more happy doing the overhead press family, the row family. If you can do front squats, that'd be great. And deadlift variations as appropriate. Then a lot of bear crawls, a lot of, and crawl, the whole crawl family, rope climb, monkey bar. I would think tumbling would be a good idea. And of course, since you have the equipment, I think just good old fashioned, doing, going up the ladders is great conditioning. If you've ever, had to paint a room and you go up and down on the ladder, you get that weird soreness the next day, and you have those big ladders, which are even, I guess even harder. I hope I did okay on this question, but let me just say this, Brian, I really agree with you about the idea of adding the strength component, but don't let it slide over in. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with bodybuilding, but if you're training like Mr. Universe, and you have to, to save your life, you have to do monkey bars or whatever, whatever it's, you sometimes I call in my book Bounce, I call it survive before you thrive. Sometimes for pure survival, you need to have your bear crawl and your rope climb and your ability to use ladders. And then of course, on a ladder, it'd be nice to be able to carry me down. Okay. So make sure you work on carrying me down the ladder too. Okay. And thank you for what you do for us and all of our firefighters. A lot of members of my family, of course, in my family, we're a very military family, a lot of police officers, a lot of firefighters, a lot of public servants. And so I've had a lot of chances to interact with firefighters after tough situations. And it's glamorous until it's hard. Okay, well, thank you. And I appreciate all you do for us, all of you first responders in every country, and thank you. Our next question is from Sergey. And Sergey says this. He says, several times I've heard you mention the value of the kettlebell clean might be for building biceps. Could you please elaborate on that further? The kettlebell community seems to scoff at any mention of arm involvement in exercises such as the clean, snatch, and the swing. However, certain arm action does seem to be inevitable. So is the arm pull during the clean indeed a deadly sin? Sergey, no. And I'll answer this. I actually answered this question well over a decade ago, maybe 15 years. And the article's over at Dragon Door, and I call myself the king of the clean, or the champion of the kettlebell clean, or something like that. But I'll answer it there. If it's not a sin, if not, what is the golden middle between the arm pull and the leg drive? Can kettlebell clean replace more popular bicep isolation exercises like the curl? Now that's an interesting question. Could you please talk more about the topic of the bicep involvement and the potential for kettlebells building arms? Okay, let's answer that question first because he has a whole bunch of questions underneath this too. Okay, so the function of the bicep, in school, everybody learns that there's 3 functions of the bicep, but actually there's a 4th. So the most obvious one, if you ask my grandson, what does grandpa lift weights for? He's going to flash the gun, right? So the most common role of the bicep, of course, is this, the curl movement, okay? But the other one that is just as important, and I believe Arnold and Larry Scott, Vince Garanda, and some other bodybuilders really figured this out, is that the second big job of the bicep is to do that, is to move this way. So every time you do that, that works the bicep. So if you're doing alternating curls and you add a little twist, well, at least on the anatomy class, that is working your biceps harder. The third is the job of the bicep is to pin or hold the hand, the forearm to the chest, to this part of your body, okay? And that's the third part. The fourth, though, and very much, the bicep is very much like the leg biceps. I mean, obviously, the names are the same. But the leg bicep, and one of the reasons we used to have issues with hamstring tears all the time, is the leg bicep is asked to do two things. One is to do, the leg curl machine, okay? But the other one is to sort of kind of acts as a tendon ligament when sprinting. So most of that leg return action isn't leg biceps when you're sprinting. It's just a very efficient biomechanical movement. I don't know if you could build speed by doing leg curls. I don't know if you could. I doubt it, but I mean, someone's gonna, send me a study that it did work. So the bicep, the fourth job, is very much like that. And the way you pick up on that, Sergey, is when you do something like monkey bars. Now, it's the second time I've mentioned monkey bars, but monkey bars and rope climbing are strangely good exercises for the bicep. And the reason is because it is assisting, it's combining everything together. It's acting in a monkey bar, or in the javelin throw, which we discovered, and that's a whole other story for another time. How doing monkey bars started helping my javelin thrower's shoulders feel better. Well, when we looked into it, we looked more closely at this fourth job, and it was like, oh, that makes sense. So by working the shoulder through that big range and using the bicep in its role to keep everything connected, keep everything connected through the movements here, it seemed to really help the bicep. The kettlebell clean does, practically all four jobs too. There's no science here. I'm already out of my depth, as you can tell, but you do a kettlebell clean, there is a bit of a turn. You do pin the hand on the chest. You do kind of do a bicep curl. At least it looks that way, but it is happening. And then, of course, it's also helping you hold everything together up here. Interesting, I think, where the real work on the kettlebell clean for the bicep is when you drop it back down. You do have to break it just for a moment. And I have found in my career that sometimes the breaking causes, the stopping of a muscle, trying to consciously stop it, gives me more delayed onset muscle soreness than the actual doing. So yeah, I think it is an exercise that is good for the arms. You can kind of tell it is, because that's where the phrase armor building came to me, was from my American football running backs telling me that the double kettlebell clean felt to them like what they dealt with in a game. We ran the veer offense, and so these guys are getting a lot of shots from the sides throughout the whole game. And after that, I realized that the double kettlebell clean might really help my running backs. And of course, if it helps the running backs, it's going to help everybody else. Then pretty soon, there's a long story to this. And now we have the book Armor Building Formula, based on an observation by high school running backs that when they said it feels like the game. Okay, so that's question number one. Sergey asks a second question. And the second topic: one thing that I found most appealing to me in your style of discussing athleticism and strength training was the high value you ascribe to overhead pressing. Absolutely. The kettlebell press is my favorite exercise. The rack position in kettlebelling feels very athletic and right for resistance training. And I got to tell you, the alternating kettlebell press might have been the one that won me over with kettlebells. The groove of the bell while pressing feels very natural. As of recent, though, I seem to start noticing a trend within the bodybuilding field of discussion towards devaluing and discarding the overhead press as the ultimate shoulder exercise. Seems like people are just overhead pressing less. Yeah, I'll just tell you why. It's embarrassing to overhead press because, in my own case, when I was young and beautiful, I used to bench press 405 all the time. I felt that was all I needed because Dr. Tom Fahey told all I needed to be able to do was bench 4. So I used to just go in and bench 4. And then I'd walk over to the military press and I would struggle with 100 pounds. It made no sense. Now, obviously, I didn't practice it like I did when I was young. When I was young, the overhead press was the king of the lifts. When you asked how strong you were, the answer would always be the overhead press number. The most widely used argument for this is that the overhead press does not target the middle deltoids enough. How do we know that? But I'm not going to argue with the Frankenstein's monster concept. I understand that this is more within Frankenstein's monster framework of discussion, but shoulder anatomy is shoulder anatomy. So the question is, does the overhead press still remain the best tool of getting the proverbial barnyard wide shoulders? Could you please talk more about the philosophy of overhead pressing? One thing, I just for the record, I know for athletes that you get more bang for the buck from increasing your military press than from increasing any other press. Now that is a strong statement, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people pushing back from it. But the thing I like most about the military press is it is a whole body movement, especially if you do them like I do, which is the clean and press. Before that bar travels 7 feet from the floor height to my lockout. That's a huge range. And if I don't get the clean right, I can't make the press. So I got to have my hinge locked in. I squat clean, so I have to have my front squat locked in. I have to be braced, locked down. There's no room for any squiggly body movement. I have to have what I call that anaconda strength. So I think that carries over the most. Now, I've mentioned before my love of the alternate press, and I just like it because I think when you do the alternate press, it also reminds your body of that, or sometimes called the seesaw press. I have another variation called the touchdown press. But as you do it, you can really get a sense of how your body lives on that X, that where if you're pressing with your left side, you can really feel your right side having to cramp up. And of course, your left side's working hard, and that's why I like it. So these are 2 good questions, and I wish somebody would write a book about using the double kettlebell clean and the double kettlebell press for hypertrophy purposes. And I'll say it for the 100 millionth time. If all you can do is kettlebell clean, kettlebell press, and kettlebell front squat, especially with doubles, you're pretty much taken care of everything you're going to need for your body composition and maybe even your athletic ability. Again, big statement, impossible to prove, but I think it's underutilized. Those 3 movements are underutilized, and I definitely know that the double kettlebell clean and the double kettlebell press are. And I got to tell you, the single clean and press is pretty amazing too. So great questions. So yes, you can build biceps and barnyard wide shoulders with your clean and press. All right, thank you. Okay, Nick asks a question, and it's about the armor building formula. The armor building formula book is available at armorbuildingformula.com. And I'm going to answer Nick's questions, but I've been warned not to give away the entire book. I've just purchased and read through several times your latest book, The Armor Building Formula, Bodybuilding for Real People, after experimenting with the ABC over the last few weeks. While it was made clear that the appropriate weight to use differs by person, what isn't clear is if the weights used during the press days only is supposed to be less or the same weight as the weight used during the ABC days. While I'm able to do 15 minutes every minute on the minute with dual 20Ks for the ABC, I can't make it through the first sequence of 10 in the first round of 2, 3, 5, 10 with the 20. As it turns out, I can barely make it through the first round with the 18. How much lighter should we be aiming for on the press-only days? In previous podcasts, you had advised against doing more than 15 to 20 rounds of the ABC at a time. More recently advised to go up to 30 rounds. Why this change? Oh, there's no change. And Nick, the idea, the armor building formula is an 8-week progression up to the 30 minutes. It's just a nice, you'll notice that I usually recommend in the book, 10, 15, and up to maybe 20 rounds. And that's just because I think for most people, reasonably, that they can do 1 or 2 sessions a week of 10, 15, or 20 rounds for a long time in the ABC. But up to 30, you can get there. But, if you're doing 30 rounds twice a week, that's an hour out of your week. And and from the research, from the article I read in Consumer Reports a million years ago, not many people stick around in training. So that's why I said that. But let's talk about the press issue. Now, if you read Easy Strength Omni book, I have that little section in the end there where I talk about this idea that there are people who are born to push and there are people who are born to pull. There are people who are born to hinge and people born to squat. And I have this little quadrant in that book. And I am a classic push hinger. I never had to train the deadlift because it was just a natural movement for me. My bench press and my deadlift, which I rarely did throughout my athletic career, I did a lot of incline bench press, yes. And I did deadlift variations, yes, snatch grip usually, but not actual bench or traditional deadlift. And it was very easy for me. So when I put together a program, and this is a good criticism of my work, and I have no issues. To me, I just go like that with the press stuff. Well, of course, everybody can do 2, 3, 5, 10 with that bell. But then I got to remind myself, not everyone's a presser. Some people are better at pull-ups or the pulling movements. And that's, it's not 100% accurate, but it's close enough that we can use it as an example. So what I'm recommending for most people, and this is why, people ask for an armor building complex book. And so and it's still evolving, and not the complex and not the training, but the feedback is evolving. One of the things I'm recommending for a lot of people who struggle on the press now, and maybe this includes you, is go 2, 3, 5, 2, 3, 5, 2, 3, 5. If the 5's too hard, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, and just build up the volume that way. Working with somebody who is coming off of an injury and they want to do Pavel's Rite of Passage program. So, they're doing 1, 2, 3s. Well, as they're coming back from a surgery, they're not yet strong enough to even get close to their old numbers. So we're doing an interesting thing. And when you hear the numbers, you'll realize that the person's still just starting out. So we do the single with 14K. We do the double with 12K. And we do the triple with 10K. After a few weeks, we started to do, you're going to know where this is going to head, I'm sure. But we're doing the single with the 14, the double with the 14, and then from there, we just, 12, 12, 10. After a few more weeks, then you start to go 14, 14, 14, 12, 12. And very much like the fighter, it was sometimes called a Russian fighter pull-up progression, where you just keep nudging up those reps. With this, we're just nudging up the load. So an idea for you, and it looks like you have a good bell collection, maybe go 2, 3, 5 with the 20, and then go to something like the 12 for the 10. And then you'll say, well, that's too easy. Okay, 2, 3, 5 with the 20, the 14 for the 10. And then nudge that up over a few week period if you'd like, or in the workout itself. I kind of wish, and this is just me thinking, I don't know which way I would tell you on this, Nick, but if you decide to go the 20s, 2, 3, 5, and let's just say the 10 for the 10, stick with that for that whole workout to the point that the 10s are like, okay, that's easy because you're getting clean reps in, no failure. If you bump the weight up next time to a 12, that 12 might feel like the 10 did, and then that tells us that, you know, you're making progress with those heavier weight, higher rep sets. I hope that helped. Armorbuildingformula.com for those of you who don't know what we're talking about. And I got to tell you, I really appreciate all the feedback I'm getting. There's a whole bunch of threads that I've come on different sites on the internet, and I'm just happy to see people making good, solid progress. My favorite thing I keep reading is people talking about their clothes fitting different. The shirts are getting too tight here, and the pants are getting loose around the belt line. And that's progress. So thank you. Good question. Got a question from John. What a lovely name. Over the years, I've always struggled with weighted squats, mostly the barbell back squat. The struggle and imbalance was so bad, I could barbell overhead press more weight than I could back squat. I assume some of this was mental, but I'm pretty sure there were some physical limitations that contributed to these struggles. I'm 6'4" with longer legs, and there you go. So I assume my build somewhat causes the imbalance. I would say there's some truth to that, and I'll comment more in just a moment. My question is, should I lean into my strengths and continue to focus hinge, deadlift, and presses for strength and resign myself to the fact I'll never be able to squat for weight? Or should I focus more on my weakness, squatting? So there can be 2 points here. First off, and I just mentioned it, for those of you listening straight through on the podcast, it's a repeat, but we do make those shorts, so here we go. In Easy Strength Omnibook, I summarize this idea of the push and the pull, and then there's a squat and the hinge, and then I made a little quadrant of that, and I am your classic push hinger, just like you are, actually. I mean, you and I are, you know, John, well, it's funny, we got the same name, so that's why, my last name is your first name. So for me, if I'm getting ready for a Highland game or a track meet, a discus throw, I'm going to push and I'm going to hinge. I'm going to snatch and clean and deadlift. I'm going to incline. I'm going to military. I'm going to get as strong as I can. And I'm going to squat and do pulls as appropriate to keep myself healthy. After the meet, I'm going to start working on those things. It's funny, we have that one workout on Wednesday here at the gym. Mike Warren Brown takes me through it. And basically, it's about a half hour of pure pulling. It's TYIs, it's rows, it's single arm rows, it's, you know, just stuff, a whole variety of pull movements. And that's to kind of build up my weakness, which is the pull. And I squat every single day now, either goblet squat, front squat, or overhead squat, because that's my weakness. So I want you to think about that from Easy Strength Omnibook. But the other thing I want you to think about is this. It's a phrase I've used. I wish I could remember who told me this, because I'd give them a high five and a thank you. But you compete with your strengths, but you work on your weaknesses. And I've sort of said that already. But if making the discus go far, basically we know you need basically a 250 pound snatch, 300 clean, 450 squat, 400 bench. Not big numbers. So if you come to me and you can do 50 pull-ups, and you're 6'4", you're 240, you can do 50 pull-ups, but you can only snatch 135. That's great. I'm impressed with your pull-ups. I mean, no question about that. But we have got to get that hinge up. We've got to get your weakness, the hinge, up until you're at international levels of strength, because that's my job. So if you're going to compete, and there are times we just got to say, hey man, this is your gift. Let's go with it. I'm not exactly sure. I think there are discus techniques that would help, I think, a puller a little bit more. My friend John Powell, who basically revamped the linear technique, the late, great John Powell, he was a master at pull-ups. I made the mistake of getting a pull-up contest with him one time, and I got destroyed. But when it came to the Olympic lifts, I was much better. So when John competed with me, we did pull-ups. When it came to snatches and clean and jerks, he didn't want to play. I love you, John, and I see why you did that now. So I would say, and you'd be very much like it, I would say press and hinge, and then find variations of the squat. Obviously, you don't like back squats. Belt squats might be an option. Goblet squats might be an option. Overhead squats will look interesting with a 6'4" person who's not very good at squatting, and front squats. But honestly, as I'm spitting out this idea here, if you can put together a belt squat system for your home gym or the gym you're at, that might be far better answer, because you can go fairly heavy on them and your height won't be such an issue because of the levers. Okay? Hey, fun question, and thank you. We have a question from Gage. You answered questions on several occasions pertaining to training for police or fire academies. I'm wondering how you would approach training for someone who is out of the academy and active in the front line role. Training, taking into account the physical demands and stress of all these jobs, the shift work, the constant readiness required of these professions, how would you suggest a frontline professional approach their training? It's interesting because I have this thing, it's already started, but it's called the Inner Circle, at least the session we're on now. We've had a number of people in there who had active roles in active roles in the military and police work. I also worked with a number of police departments through the years. In fact, I've had a lot of success with a certain SWAT team in Northern California who I've come in and played with a number of times. I have a program called the Post-Deployment Program, or on the website, danjohnuniversity.com. I think it's called the Hypertrophy and Mobility Program. Personally, that's how I would train you. I think you need to mix a strength/hypertrophy exercise, like the military press. The exercises in it are the military press, a pull-up variation, rack deadlifts, and the back squat. Those are the 4 key exercises, and then a loaded carry family. But what I suggest that you start thinking about is this. So you do a military press, and let's just say I'm just making it up, but you do the first week, you do 1 set of 15. I think that's what in the book. And then you would do a waiter walk down and back, and then you would do an original strength mobility move. And let's just say it's neck nods, okay? Week 1, you're only doing 1 set. Let's go to week 3. It makes more sense. So you're going to do military press, followed by the waiter walk, followed by the neck nod. 1 round, military press, waiter walk, neck nod. Round 2, military press, waiter walk, neck nod. Round 3. Now you move on to the pull. And every exercise, you have to do that hypertrophy strength exercise, the barbell movement. You have to do a loaded carry, and you have to do a mobility exercise. And the reason I think that's such a good combination is very much like complexes, which I often recommend for collision occupations. And complexes are when you have one piece of equipment, the barbell, the kettlebell, the dumbbell, and it stays in your hands the entire series of exercises. So if you're doing 5 or 6 exercises in a row, you keep the barbell in your hand the whole time. Circuit training sounds the same, but in circuit training, you do an exercise with this piece of equipment, walk over to that piece of equipment, walk over to that piece of equipment, walk over to that piece of equipment. With complexes, you don't even get that little release of the movement away from the machine or the barbell or whatever. So what I think you guys should do is something like 3-4 months of a program, like I said, in the post-deployment program. And then about 3 weeks would be a long time, but 3 weeks to 8 weeks of just complexes. So you're really getting that heart thumping in the complexes. You're really testing every inch of your body. The downside of complexes, and I'll be honest with you, they get boring after. So my throwers in the off season, we do complexes and circuit training. I mean, it's an Olympic lifting focused circuit training, and it's Olympic lifting focused complexes. But to be honest, it is after a few weeks of it, they will tell me I'm in the best shape of my life. I look great. I feel great, but I'm just sick of the complexes. And the reason you get sick of them, it's not very scientific, but they're hard. Well, I hope I answered your question. It's a good question. And if you have more questions, you let me know because I like this. Okay, we have a question from Neil, and I like what he says right away. I know you try to stay away from medical advice, so I hope this isn't veering too far into that territory. I have had an issue for several years, and it mostly happens in my martial arts classes, where my knee seems to pop out of the socket. It seems like something shifts, and I am unable to move it for several moments while I wait for it to shift back into position. Okay, with knees over toes being the rage a couple of months ago, I wonder what movements do you recommend for strengthening the knee tendon and that sort of thing? Have you any experience with knee strengthening or rehab exercises in your own career or your athletes? Now, I don't want to talk specifically about this knee popping thing, but I would really get that looked at. I haven't heard of athletes getting this. I've never seen this, but I've heard of it. In fact, very famously in Ted Lasso, Roy Kent does it, which is kind of funny. He makes that terrible sound. This is interesting because the question comes at a good time, because I was just talking to one of my old buddies when we were doing discus camp together. This is over 20 years ago. And we came up with this idea of doing farmer walks uphill. And when we did farmer walks uphill, we noticed the next day that it was, I got to tell you folks, doing farmer walks uphill might be one of the most underrated butt exercises the world has seen. Doing heavy farmer walks up a hill is a terribly hard workout. It's a combination of step ups and squats and everything else and farmer walks. And then one day we decided to one up each other and walk backwards up the hills farmer walking. And that's when the bell rang. There are some exercises that help the knee. Now, when I was young, leg extensions were the answer to all knee questions. And then we found out, someone told us, everything in my field is bad, by the way. Every food item is bad, every exercise is bad, everything is bad, 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 because that's the way the fitness industry works. Everything is bad, and you should do what I say instead. Okay, I'm rambling. But what we picked up on was that terrible burn you get when you do high rep leg extensions. We were getting that terrible burn, on the horseshoe muscles around your knee. We were getting that massive on fire burn. During camp that year, we had a bunch of girls that we experimented with this, and most good female discus throwers probably played basketball and or volleyball too. So they all complain about their knees a lot. And when we had them do this, the response universally was like, oh, wow, that feels good. They were getting the benefits of the leg extension without the problems of the leg extension. Now, I know it doesn't seem like much. Now, if you don't have a hill you can walk up backwards, and I'm not recommending steps because I don't think that would be safe, but you could put a smallish box, and it might not work perfect, but you could just step up, step down, step up, step down, and maybe I'm facing this way, so my knee so I have to step back with my foot. It might not be perfect. You might have to experiment with it. And I would stick, if you're doing it that method, I would stick on one side for a bunch of reps and go to the other side for a bunch of reps. And also, too, don't let the box is not 10 feet. The box is, I mean, you could probably stack a couple mats. It doesn't have to be very big at first, and then maybe you want to go a little higher. If you really want to test it, just walk backwards with weights up a hill, and you'll see that you have what we used to call in football choppy steps. Chop, chop, chop. They're not big, exaggerated steps, because you just can't do it. But backwards walking up a hill is magnificent. Now, when we do our rucking, when we do our heavy hands, almost all of us turn around and do some walking backwards. I have a program, a part of my training is something I call the Great Eight. It's got a great name, but it's not much. So what I do, now my athletes call them skippity slappities, which I think is hilarious, but it's high knee skipping where my right hand hits my left knee, my left hand hits my right knee. I go about 40 meters, skippity slappity, rest a lot longer as I age, rest, and then I backpedal coming back. The backpedaling and the walking backward up hills is pretty good knee love. It's pretty good. Is it perfect? Yeah, I don't know. But I will say this, I'm 67. I'm still Olympic lifting. I'm still doing lots of front squats and squat cleans and squat snatches. That little dose, really, the Great Eight, really does some great things, I think, for my overall lower body health. So just 2 ideas: farmer walks backward up hills and backpedaling as best you can. Thank you. That's a good question. We got a question from Patrick, and what a great name. And when you hear where he's from, even better. He's from one of my favorite spots on the planet Earth, one of the most beautiful places. I'm a 28-year-old man from Donegal, Ireland. I've recently started to work nights from 12 p.m. to 8 a.m. And I'm looking for advice on balancing work, sleep, and my sport, Gaelic football. Oh, okay. Well, I'd love to see videos of you playing. Gaelic football is a fun game. We train 2 days a week, Tuesday and Thursday, and we have our games either Saturday or Sunday. I also coach the under-18 team for my GAA club, Gaelic Athletic Association Club, and with training or matches on Mondays for the first time this year, so a new commitment of my time. My issue is that with recent change in work and the workload of other commitments during the week, I'm finding it difficult to fit in some work in the weight room. Last year, I really committed to the weight room with the program of an S&C coach, and I had my best year so far. This year, without that work, I'm noticing a lost step on the pitch, and I don't break tackles like I did last year. I know that I just need to find the time, but any advice you can offer is much appreciated. Well, I will say one thing, Patrick, and we learned this. I used to work night cleanup at a place called Schreiber's Cheese Factory in Logan, Utah, a long time ago. And I was on the 10 o'clock to 6:30 shift. And I remember them telling us that day shift was the healthiest and night shift was right behind it. And the worst shift was those poor people who went 3:30 to midnight. I guess that's the hardest one to make balance in your life. And I thought it was weird because, I'd come home at 7 o'clock and be like, man, but the nice thing about that is you can watch must-see TV and you can go to movies and hang out with people and then show up at work at 10. What I finally figured out, it took me a while to figure out how to train with this, but what I discovered, Patrick, and this is what I'm telling you, the moment you get off work at 8 a.m., if you have a home gym, I would really recommend that. But if you can stop at your local gym and get your weight workout in then, try to lift weights at 8 a.m. So, of course, looking at your schedule, this is going to work okay for you because if you get your weight workout in the moment you get home, I would lift. It's not perfect because there's going to be nothing perfect. You're going to have to make the decision on whether you eat after that meal or not. Because probably you go to sleep right after that so that you can do all this extra work Tuesday, Thursday, and Monday nights. You have to make that decision if you get, I don't really have advice. You have to test it out. You might want to try, so you get your work, you get done with work, you get your strength workout in, you eat. Now, you might want to try a week where you do protein shake only and then go to sleep. See how that makes you feel. You might want to do a week where you have a prepared, higher calorie thing. That's the joy of sandwiches. They got a lot of calories. Burritos and sandwiches, they're calorie bombs, man. You can put a lot of calories in a small unit. And then try that for a couple weeks, and then maybe try, a more traditional like dinner or more traditional breakfast and see what one works best. But Patrick, number one, first and foremost, the second that shift ends, while you're still awake from the shift, get your weight workout in, down protein as best you can, get it in, and vegetables as best you can. You might even have to fast. It's just like I say, it's just gonna depend on how you can make this work, and then get your sleep in. But this is a very workable schedule the way you have this. You're just gonna have to make some sacrifices to get that workout in at 8 in the morning. I will say that you are gonna probably have 1 or 2 tough nights a week. I always found it was that transitional night that was hardest for me. I would get off work. What was Friday was Saturday morning at 6:30, and then in college football, I would go to the game, and I hadn't gone to sleep. That day was always the hardest. Then I'd have this great night of sleep on what would be Saturday night. I'd have this great night of sleep on what would be Sunday night, and then I would have to stay up 24 hours. I always found that was the thing that started to wear on me. But I coached, I trained, I got a master's degree, all while doing that. So it's doable. It is hard. And next time I'm in Donegal, say hi. And if you happen to bump into a guy named Craddock, you tell him his brother from another mother says hi. All right, thank you. Well, I can't believe that went very quickly. That's it for this week. That was a fun series of questions. It was interesting how some of the same topics came up over and over. And that seems to happen sometimes. So if you have questions, send them to podcast@danjohnuniversity.com. I'll do my best to answer them, each and every one. And it was nice to hear from firefighters again today and our friends up in Donegal. And until next time, let's all keep on lifting and learning. Thank you.